welcome to our conversation and lecture about designing your actual capstone project or thesis. This lecture is going to walk you through the process of how to build a capstone project or thesis and also the options you have as you consider that process. So, in Iris, you have two options for how to go about tackling your capstone project. The first is the traditional research paper, the investigative option. If you've ever written a research paper, you sort of already know what this looks like. You have a research question, you collect data, you analyze it, and you present it in a pretty academic format. The second option in Iris is the creative or applied project, and this is the creation of a product that's related to your area of focus, and it can be anything from a series of paintings or short stories to a grant application for a very specific grant, to the development of curriculum, to the development of workshops or trainings for a specific field, about specific topics. And I'm going to be pulling examples from other IRIS graduates over the years, a lot of students who I've taught, as we talk through this lecture, just to help sort of get you thinking about your options. So, as you begin your project, and remember, some of you may already be beyond this step and have a really solid project idea in mind, but some of you won't be. And either way, these questions should help guide you in the creation or the writing of the project. But these are some questions to begin with in terms of brainstorming at the very beginning of your project. So we should be doing these things pretty early on. First question is, what do you already know? What are you bringing to the table? What classes have you taken around these topics? What work or life experiences do you have with them? What do you know? And then finally, your next is, why do you care? This is a really important question that people often forget to even address. If you don't tell me why this matters, this question, this topic, this project matters, then it's really hard for me to understand where it fits within the larger scheme of things. So that so what question that you're going to be asked again and again, that's a really important one. So you need to think about why it's important to you, why it's important to other people, what does it matter in the large scheme of things. You need to think about what more you want to learn about it, right? We're not experts yet, but we will be. And so what do we still need to know in order to do a good job? What are the main questions or problems you're trying to answer or address? Where do you look for additional information? Can you use the libraries? Do you need to go talk to people and get data directly from people? A big one is, who's your audience and how can you reach them? If you're doing an investigative project, your audience is going to be an audience of academics, so you're going to need to write formally. But if you're doing a more creative project, is your audience going to be patrons of a museum? Is your audience going to be young adult fiction readers? Is your audience going to be elementary age kids in a naturalist program? Who are you trying to create this for? Because that's going to affect the style that you use and the product that you create. And then you need to think about sort of the main goal and where you want your work to fit within the larger scheme of things in these fields. So the first step in this process is to identify your project. You start with your area of focus, which you should all have well defined by now, and you need to think about what the big questions are in that field, and also what your questions are, or what kind of programming or information or work is missing in that field or those fields. What isn't there that you can help provide? And then you equally need to consider what your goal for your degree is. Is your goal to continue to work or find work in a specific field, in a specific job? Because if that's the case, you might want to create something that's usable in that job or in that field. Maybe you want to do this because you have an unconventional pathway in the future and you want this holistic integration of information. I had one student who wanted to create sort of a utopian nonprofit, and he used queer liberation theory and he used radical pedagogy theories, and he basically just produced a pretty traditional program proposal, like new business proposal for this crazy radical organization he was proposing, because his pathway was untraditional, but it was holistic, and he was trying to fit it within the larger world. And so I want you to think about both those things, how your area of focus works and what you want to know in it, and then also what your real goals are. So, what is your end goal, right? Are you hoping to go to graduate school? Because if that's the case, an investigative project will give you the practice in data analysis and collection, in formal academic writing, in um, developing literature reviews and searches, and that is very helpful for graduate school. Maybe you are already working or you want to go directly into the field. Maybe an applied project will help you. I had one student who had been working at a call center for a bank for many years, and so his project was to create a new onboarding program that helped people feel more connected and find their success earlier in that program or in that job because they were seeing a lot of turnover. So his focus was really on decreasing turnover by creating a more robust onboarding program. And that was very helpful for him. It helped him get a raise and a new job title. And then maybe you are somebody who wants to create something new in the world in terms of um, art or music or literature. And so you're going to develop a performance. You're going to create programs that teach young people how to do theater of the oppressed. You're going to do a series of portraits that demonstrate grief, whatever, right? And so think about what you want out of this. This is an opportunity for you to create something that is usable for you in the future, and I hope that you do so. So, in order to do that, I'm suggesting that you talk it out with everyone and anyone you absolutely can. Use our Flipgrid discussions to help sort of work through these questions. Talk to your advisors, your families, your friends, old professors you had. Just get everyone's input in order to refine the ideas that you have. Think about your goals, and then decide on a broad topic and let your goals and that topic work together to sort of narrow it down to a very specific project, because you can't take on the whole world in one semester. So you really are going to need to think about, is this doable? So after you have your idea of your project, your research question, or your outcomes, I want you to think about the field itself. So what disciplines is your project drawing from? Let's say you're creating a naturalist program for kids in elementary that's partnering with the Blandford Nature Center. So you're going to need to study ecological theory. You're going to need to study learning theories. You're going to need to study how ecological studies classes have been created for and with young people. So you're really pulling from education, psychology, environmental science, so on and so forth. Those are your disciplines. And then you have to think about what theorists or researchers or theories are the large ones in that field, both cutting edge and traditional. Um, let's say that you're looking at working with young parents to develop parenting programs. Well, you're going to need to think about what kind of learning theories matter in a parenting program. So you'll look at Albert Bandura, or you'll look at Vygotsky, or you'll look at Piaget. And so thinking about who are the big names and what are the big ideas in that field, and then what's missing, what can you contribute, what don't we know, how will your project address those questions, and then finally, and this is really at the heart of all of our IRIS classes, is whose voices are not being heard in this project, and how can you address that? Who's missing, right? Let's say you're creating a project that is the development of a discussion guide for a book club for teenagers. Well, what kind of material are you giving them? Are you giving them material that addresses the experience of people of color, of queer people? Are you giving them material that is all written from the same perspective? Like, you have to think about sort of bringing in new ideas and voices in your projects. Once you have all that idea, you know the fields, you know the disciplines, you know the people in the fields, you know the major theories or ideas, that's when you start writing your literature review. And it looks slightly different depending on what kind of project you have. For an investigative project, it's pretty traditional. It explores the state of the field. It gives some information about the main theories, the main findings, some critiques of those things, and it really is supposed to serve as a snapshot to support your research question. This is what we know. This is what we don't know. My research will address this. For creative applied projects, a little bit more creative. It's going to place your project in conversation with the field and the problem that you're trying to address, and it's going to highlight the theories and the theorists and concepts that underlie that work. Um, and it's going to ground it in an academic conversation. And a lot of this will come through also in your scholarly contextualization paper, but for your creative project, it's really thinking about what uh, what do we know about this larger question. So let's say you're writing a young adult fiction novel on grief, about death and dying and grief. And so you're going to need to know about how young people interpret the world, right? So thinking about cognition and the ways in which we make meaning of things. And so there are lots of theories and research on that. You're going to need to think about death and dying and what we know about death and dying. So you might pull from Kubler-Ross or other theorists around death and dying. And you're going to need to think about sort of narrative and how do you develop a narrative. So you're going to pull from narrative theories. And so no matter what your project is, there's going to be an academic or theoretical conversation that your project is going to speak to. And for a creative or applied project, your lit review is going to be addressing those academic and theoretical conversations in order to place it within the larger scheme of things. So once you have an idea about the research you need and the data, like the kind of information you need, then you're going to have to actually build the project or begin the research. If you're doing a traditional investigative project, you're going to need to think about, do you need permissions? If you want to talk to humans, if you want to gather data from humans, you're going to need IRB permission most likely. And if that's the case, you need to start that ASAP because it's a process. It takes a minute to get it. And so it might not even be doable. So that's something we need to figure out right away and get the permissions you need. You need to decide on a method of data collection and analysis. Are you doing a content analysis of television shows to look at representations of police in television shows? Or are you going to do focus groups to talk to people? Are you going to collect sort of scientific data on honeybees? Like whatever it is that you're going to need to collect, you're going to figure out how you're going to collect it and how you're going to analyze it. And you're going to actually need to write a piece in that paper in your project about the method and why you chose that method. So you have to be thoughtful about this. And then you're going to actually gather the data and start analyzing the data so that you can write your paper. For a creative or applied project, what this looks like is deciding on both an outcome and a medium. Do you want to create programs that encourages preschool age children to um, have inclusive educational practices, to see more representation of different races and ethnicities in their material? So if that's the outcome, then what can you do to do that? Maybe you develop curriculum built around a series of books for young children that are inclusive, right? So the medium might be curriculum. You're going to use backwards design to develop the material. So you've got your end goal, you've got your medium. So now how can you think backwards in order to develop the project itself to meet that goal? And you're going to let field standards be your guide. Let's say you're doing that curriculum for young children. So what do the early education theorists say about the development of curriculum for young children? How they learn, how they engage with new ideas, how they think about identity, that kind of stuff. You're gonna need to know sort of how that works. And then also, if it's a curriculum, you're gonna need to think about learning objectives, learning goals, discussion or activities, right? So what do we need to have in a curriculum so that it can be implemented by a teacher? All right, so once you have those things in place, you've got your research down, you've gathered your data, and you're ready to actually build the project or write it together, these are the components of each one. You'll find this both in the syllabus, on Blackboard under assignments, and then also in this lecture. So if you're going to do an investigative project, you're going to need to have the abstract, which is the short introduction, like a paragraph or two, to your project, start to finish. This is what I studied, this is what I found, this is why it's important. And then you're going to have an introduction to your project, which is going to introduce the research question more explicitly. It's going to give that background information about the fields that you're pulling from. It might involve also some of that scholarly contextualization. Why are you doing this work? What is interesting to you about it? And then you're going to have a methods or methodology section. Why did you choose the methods you did? How did you actually analyze that data? And then you'll have that research integration and analysis. So a little bit more of the scholarly contextualization is here. How doing this made you look at the field differently or similarly, what you actually found, what does the data say is happening here, and then the conclusion, and that's the so what piece. Why do we care? What's important about this? What's unique about this? And then finally, you have references. For a creative applied project, it looks a little bit different. You've got that abstract, the who, what I found, why, very short. Then you've got a problem statement. Similar to an introduction, you're going to introduce the reader to the issue that you're trying to address or the topic you're trying to cover, and why you are doing it and what matters about it. Then you've got that academic community-based research section, and that section is really that lit review a little bit, but also some of that scholarly contextualization. What do we know about these ideas and theories? What do we need to know? Why are you the one to do it? What matters? You're going to summarize your work and give some conclusions. So let's say you wrote a novel for young adults. You're going to talk about the process of writing that novel, what you had to do, what worked, what didn't work, how you created it, basically. And a little bit more of that scholarly contextualization will happen in here. You'll actually produce a prototype or the final project itself for this. So if you're writing a book for young adults, it might be a few chapters, it might be the full book. If you're developing a curriculum, that's what you'll turn in as your project prototype. If you are developing a series of portraits, you'll turn in some of those portraits. And then again, you'll have references just like the investigative projects do. So I keep talking about the scholarly contextualization paper, and this is like, again, one of those truly iris parts of our capstone experience. And basically what this is a portion of your final project. And we're going to be writing it sort of as a standalone piece that you can weave into your final projects if it fits, or keep as standalone if it doesn't. But in your scholarly contextualization paper, you're going to be addressing the ways in which you and your identities and your experiences impact or influence the work you do and how you engage with it. So you're thinking about questions like, how does your identity influence your research and writing? Did it present any challenges or issues or benefits as you approached it? That might be the case. Let's say you're creating a program that's an inclusive, like, learning program for preschool age children. Well, if you are a cisgendered white person, like, how are you reconciling that kind of privilege with this kind of project? And think about what it means to you, why you took it on, what biases or assumptions did you bring into this project, and if they were challenged, how and why and what happened. You're going to think about those questions that your integrated statement addresses, like how your iris education influenced your relationship to these research questions or these problems, and how it's connected to various disciplines, what it was like, was it difficult or easy to engage in this kind of work, and then what connections might you make between this project and your life goals or your past experiences, so on and so forth. And that is, like I said, truly the iris part of this project, which is to think about your place in the conversation and also your place in the world. So after you've done all of these things, you're going to integrate these pieces together. So your project is going to have all of the elements, that scholarly contextualization, the literature review, the project itself, the data analysis, the conclusions, the abstract. All of those things are part of everyone's project. And like I mentioned already, while we're working independently on these scholarly contextualization papers, sort of as a standalone, that doesn't mean that it has to be. So a lot of you might find it's actually pretty easy to weave into the bigger piece because you're already addressing a lot of these topics within the project. So the next steps for everyone is to watch the literature review lecture. Just as a reminder, you should have already learned a lot about these in your methods class, and then also probably already written a literature review in your methods class that I highly encourage you, if you're working on the same topic, to pull from for your capstone. You need to continue to participate in our class Flipgrids. They will help us as a class collectively sort of refine our ideas. Don't forget that we have these individual meetings. You need to sign up for one for each of the 4 dates. And you need to come prepared and ready to discuss. And then finally, you're just going to have to do it. Sometimes it can be very overwhelming at the start of a project like this, and it can be hard to just take that first step. So I'm encouraging you to just take that first step, and I will help you do that. but really just get in there and write that particular project. Some of the things, like I said, that I would suggest that you do involve having conversations with your faculty advisor, having conversations with each other, having conversations with family members or bosses or colleagues, really just working it out. These projects are solo projects, but nothing we create is ever done in a vacuum. And so use your community and your connections to each other in this class, to me, to your faculty at GV, and to your other community members in order to start this process and build this project. I'm really looking forward to getting to see what these projects become and to talk to each of you individually about them. And hopefully this will give you some idea of the directions in which you can go and how to begin on that process.